The studio lights blazed down with merciless intensity as the audience hummed with anticipation. Another episode of Celebrity Roast was about to begin, the controversial talk show that had skyrocketed to fame for its acerbic host and no-holds-barred approach to interviewing Hollywood stars. Tonight's guests were particularly special: Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, longtime friends and co-stars who rarely appeared together on talk shows. What the audience didn't know was that what would unfold over the next hour would leave them completely speechless, forever changing the trajectory of the show itself. Marcus Reed, the host of Celebrity Roast, adjusted his designer suit and practiced his trademark smirk in a compact mirror. At 42, Marcus had built his career on being ruthlessly entertaining, earning massive ratings by humiliating celebrities with deeply personal questions and cutting remarks disguised as humor. His researchers were notorious for digging up embarrassing stories and painful memories, all fair game for Marcus's brand of entertainment. 5 minutes to air, called the floor director, as makeup artists made final touches to Marcus's face. He barely acknowledged them, scrolling through his tablet one last time to review the list of particularly brutal questions he had prepared for tonight's guests. The network executives had been clear. Ratings had been slipping lately, and they needed something explosive to reignite viewer interest. Marcus was determined to deliver. Behind the stage, in a small, sparsely decorated green room, Keanu Reeves sat in quiet contemplation. At 60, the actor carried himself with the same humble grace he'd maintained throughout his decades-long career. He wore simple dark jeans, boots, and a well-worn black blazer over a plain t-shirt. No designer labels, no flashy accessories. His beard was neatly trimmed, his hair hanging just past his shoulders, sprinkled with distinguished gray. Beside him, Sandra Bullock, 60, was reviewing some notes, elegant in a simple navy blue pantsuit. She occasionally glanced up at Keanu with a familiar warmth that spoke of their long friendship. They had agreed to this appearance together to promote a charity initiative supporting homeless youth, though both were well aware of the show's reputation. "You know he's going to try to get under our skin," Sandra said, setting down her notes. "That's his whole thing." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I've heard stories." "We could still back out," she offered with a small smile, though both knew they wouldn't. The charity needed the exposure. "Nah," Keanu replied with his characteristic gentle tone. "We've faced worse together, right?" Sandra's smile widened as she reached over to squeeze his hand. "Together?" A production assistant knocked tentatively on the door. "Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock, we're ready for you." The studio audience erupted in applause as Marcus Reed bounded onto the stage, arms spread wide in his signature entrance. "Welcome, welcome to another night of Celebrity Roast, where we say what everyone's thinking, but are too polite to say." The audience cheered louder, primed for the show's particular brand of entertainment. "Tonight, we have two Hollywood dinosaurs who've somehow managed to stay relevant despite their advancing years," Marcus began, his voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. "They made us believe in runaway buses and improbable romances, but can they make us believe they're still worth our attention? Please welcome the perpetually sad-looking Keanu Reeves and America's aging sweetheart, Sandra Bullock." The applause was immediate, but tinged with discomfort at the introduction. As Keanu and Sandra walked onto the stage, the contrast between them and their host was striking. Where Marcus was all performed energy and artificial charisma, they moved with genuine poise and authenticity. They greeted the host with professional courtesy, seemingly unaffected by his opening barb. Well, the speed duo finally slow enough for us to catch," Marcus quipped as they settled onto the sofa across from him. "It's been, 30 years since that film? That's practically ancient history in Hollywood years." 31, actually," Sandra corrected with a gentle smile. "Time flies when you're doing what you love. And when you have the privilege of working with good people," Keanu added, his voice characteristically measured. Marcus's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Their calm responses weren't giving him the reaction he'd hoped for. He decided to escalate quickly. "So, Keanu," Marcus leaned forward, "you've become this internet saint with all these stories about your generosity and humility. But let's be real, isn't it all just a carefully crafted image to stay relevant? I mean, the whole sad Keanu meme practically revived your career, right?" The audience tensed, a few uncomfortable laughs punctuating the sudden silence. This was exactly the kind of question that had made the show famous, or infamous, depending on who you asked. Keanu considered the question for a moment, his expression thoughtful rather than offended. You know, Marcus, I've never really thought about crafting an image. I'm just trying to be a decent person. We all are, in our own ways. As for staying relevant, he shrugged gently, that's never been my goal. Just doing good work, treating people with respect, that's what matters to me. Before Marcus could respond, Sandra jumped in. I've known this man for decades, and what you see is absolutely who he is. No PR team could invent Keanu Reeves. Trust me, they've tried to copy him and failed. Her warm laugh diffused some of the tension, drawing a genuine chuckle from the audience. Marcus, slightly thrown by their composed responses, quickly pivoted. Sandra, speaking of image, you've managed to maintain this America's sweetheart persona despite multiple failed relationships. Your love life has been, let's say, less successful than your box office. Any comments on why you can play romance on screen but can't seem to make it work in real life? A few gasps came from the audience. Even for Celebrity Roast, this felt unnecessarily cruel. Sandra's smile didn't falter, though something flickered briefly in her eyes. Well, Marcus, I've been blessed with an amazing career, wonderful friends, a beautiful family through adoption, and experiences many only dream of, she replied evenly. I've loved deeply, learned from every relationship, and I don't measure success by how long something lasts, but by how much it teaches you and how much joy it brings while you have it. By that measure, I'd say I'm extraordinarily fortunate. The audience broke into spontaneous applause, clearly moved by her response. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. He wasn't getting the emotional reactions he needed for viral clips. He decided to aim lower. Let's talk about your recent work, or should I say lack of notable work, he said, addressing both of them. Keanu, after the John Wick series wrapped up, it's been pretty quiet. And Sandra, your last few films have been, let's be honest, forgettable at best. Are we watching the slow fade of two careers? The question hung in the air, its intention clearly to provoke insecurity. But instead of discomfort, Keanu and Sandra exchanged a look that seemed to contain decades of shared understanding. You know, Marcus, Keanu began, leaning forward slightly, I've been in this industry for nearly 40 years now. I've seen the highs, the lows, and everything in between. And one thing I've learned is that none of it, the box office numbers, the critical acclaim, the popularity, none of it defines your worth as a human being. Exactly, Sandra nodded. At this point in our lives, we have the freedom to choose projects that matter to us, whether that's big films or small ones or no films at all for a while. Success isn't just measured in dollars or awards or staying constantly in the spotlight. But surely, Marcus pressed, visibly frustrated by their unflappable demeanor, you must feel the pressure of younger actors taking your places. The industry's obsession with youth must sting a little? Sandra laughed, a genuine sound that made several audience members smile in response. Oh, Marcus, there's room for everyone. I celebrate these incredible young actors coming up now. They're not taking anything from me. They're adding to an art form we all love. Every generation brings something new, Keanu added. That's how it should be. Evolution, not competition. Marcus was becoming visibly agitated. These were not the sound bites the producers were looking for. He glanced down at his tablet, scanning for his most provocative material, and decided to abandon subtlety altogether. Let's get real here, he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Keanu, your life has been marked by tragic losses. Your best friend, River Phoenix. Your baby with Jennifer Syme, then Jennifer herself. Sandra, your marriage imploded publicly with infidelity scandals. Don't you ever just want to scream at the unfairness of it all? Where's the anger? The bitterness? No one would blame you. The studio fell completely silent. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, shocked even by Marcus's standards. The camera crew exchanged uneasy glances. This had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. For the first time, a flash of something, not anger, but a profound sadness crossed Keanu's face. Sandra instinctively reached over and placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of support between old friends. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Keanu spoke, his voice softer but somehow filling the entire studio. Pain is something we all experience, Marcus. It's part of being human. I've had my share, yes. So has Sandra. So have you, I imagine. So has everyone sitting in this audience right now. He gestured gently toward the crowd. But pain doesn't have to make you bitter. It can make you more compassionate, more appreciative of the good moments when they come. There's a choice in how we respond to the hardest parts of life, Sandra continued, her voice steady and clear. You can let it harden you, make you cynical, make you want to hurt others because you're hurting, or you can let it soften you, open you up to the suffering of others, make you kinder. And that choice, Keanu added, is one we make every day in big and small ways. How we treat the barista making our coffee, how we talk to a taxi driver, how we interview guests on a talk show. His eyes met Marcus's directly, not with judgment, but with a quiet challenge. The implication wasn't lost on anyone in the studio. A few audience members had tears in their eyes. One woman in the front row was openly crying. Marcus Reed, for perhaps the first time in his broadcasting career, was completely speechless. His trademark smirk had vanished, and for a brief, unguarded moment, he looked suddenly very young and unsure of himself. Into the silence, Sandra spoke again, her tone gentler now. You know, Marcus, I think there's a misconception that kindness is weakness, that being cynical or cruel makes for better entertainment. But the most powerful moments I've experienced, on screen and off, have come from genuine human connection, from vulnerability, from compassion. Yeah, Keanu nodded. Entertainment doesn't have to come at someone's expense. The best laughs are the ones we share, not the ones that cost someone their dignity. The audience burst into applause, not the performative kind that television audiences often provide on cue, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation that built until people were standing. The display went on for nearly a full minute while Marcus sat frozen, his carefully constructed persona cracking visibly under the weight of the moment. When the applause finally quieted, Marcus cleared his throat, clearly struggling to regain his footing. We'll, take a quick break and be right back with more from Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. As the show cut to commercial, chaos erupted behind the scenes. The executive producer hurried onto the set, whispering urgently in Marcus's ear. Camera operators and production assistants exchanged meaningful glances. Something unprecedented was happening. The infamous celebrity roast was being reshaped in real time. When the broadcast resumed, there was a subtle but unmistakable shift in Marcus Reed's demeanor. His posture was less aggressive, his trademark smirk replaced by something closer to a genuine smile. "Welcome back to Celebrity Roast," he began, then paused, seeming to reconsider his words. "Actually, before we continue, I'd like to say something." He took a deep breath. "I think I owe our guests an apology. Some of my earlier questions crossed a line, and I want to acknowledge that." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the audience. In 5 years of broadcasting, Marcus Reed had never apologized to a guest. "So if it's all right with you," he continued, addressing Keanu and Sandra directly, "I'd like to try a different approach. You're here to talk about a charity initiative for homeless youth. Tell us about that." The relief in the studio was palpable as Keanu and Sandra exchanged surprised but pleased glances. "Thank you, Marcus," Sandra said warmly. "Yes, we're here for Foundations First, a nonprofit that focuses on providing stable housing, education, and mental health support for young people experiencing homelessness." "It's a cause close to both our hearts," Keanu added. "We've both been fortunate in our lives and careers, and this is one way we can help create opportunities for kids who haven't had the same advantages." For the remainder of the show, the conversation flowed with surprising authenticity. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about the charity, about their friendship that had spanned decades, about the lessons they'd learned through their careers. Gone were the attempts to provoke or embarrass, replaced by what seemed like genuine curiosity. When Keanu described how the charity had already helped hundreds of young people find stable housing and return to education, his passion was evident. When Sandra spoke about meeting some of the teens in the program and hearing their stories, her eyes shone with emotion. "What keeps you both going after all these years in a notoriously difficult industry?" Marcus asked, and for once, there seemed to be no hidden barb in the question. Sandra and Keanu looked at each other, a lifetime of shared experiences, passing between them in a glance. Purpose, Sandra answered simply. Finding meaning beyond yourself, using whatever platform you have, whether that's being a famous actor or, she gestured around the studio, hosting a talk show to make someone else's life a little better. Connection, Keanu added, to each other, to the work, to something larger than ourselves. That's what makes any of this worthwhile. As the show drew to a close, something remarkable happened. Marcus Reed, the man who had built his brand on mockery and confrontation, turned to the camera with uncharacteristic sincerity. "I want to thank our guests tonight for their honesty and, frankly, their patience with me," he said. "And I want to encourage our viewers to learn more about the Foundation's first initiative." The website address appeared on screen as he spoke. Sometimes it takes seeing the world through someone else's eyes to gain a new perspective. The audience rose in another standing ovation as the credits began to roll. Backstage, network executives were already in heated discussion. The show had veered dramatically from its established format, but early social media response was overwhelmingly positive. Clips of Keanu and Sandra's thoughtful responses to Marcus's initially provocative questions were already going viral, with comments praising their grace under pressure. In the green room afterward, Marcus approached his guests with visible humility. "I don't usually do this," he admitted, "but I wanted to thank you both, and to apologize again properly, off camera." "No need," Keanu assured him with his characteristic generosity. "Actually, there is," Marcus insisted. "What you said out there, about choices, about how we treat people, it hit home. I've built this whole career on being the guy who says the awful thing everyone's thinking, but maybe," he trailed off, seeming to struggle with the thought. "Maybe there's another way to connect with people," Sandra suggested gently. Marcus nodded, looking suddenly vulnerable. "I don't know if I know how to do anything else at this point." "Reinvention is always possible," Keanu said, placing a hand briefly on the host's shoulder. "Trust me on that." As they prepared to leave, Sandra turned back to Marcus. "You know, you're actually a good interviewer when you're being authentic. That last segment, that was real conversation, not just engineered confrontation." "Something to think about," Keanu added with a small smile. The following day, Celebrity Roast was the top trending topic across social media platforms, but not for its usual controversial reasons. Viewers were sharing the remarkable transformation that had occurred on air, praising Keanu and Sandra's responses, and surprisingly, Marcus's willingness to pivot and show a more authentic side. The network, recognizing a potential opportunity, called an emergency meeting with Marcus and the show's producers. What had begun as a ratings-driven attempt to create viral moments of celebrity discomfort had accidentally revealed a hunger for something different, authentic conversation that didn't come at someone's expense. 2 weeks later, Celebrity Roast aired with a new name, Off Script with Marcus Reed, and a revised format that focused on in-depth conversations rather than provocative confrontations. Marcus, initially skeptical that sincerity could be as entertaining as controversy, was surprised to find the show's ratings not only stable but growing, attracting a broader audience and a higher caliber of guests willing to appear. The episode featuring Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock became the most watched in the show's history, eventually winning an industry award for Outstanding Talk Show Episode. But more meaningful than any professional accolade was the private message Marcus received from a teenage beneficiary of the Foundation's first program, thanking him for helping bring attention to the charity that had changed his life. In Hollywood, an industry built on carefully crafted images and controlled narratives, the night that Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock responded to provocation with grace and wisdom became something of a legend, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play by the established rules, choosing kindness over conflict, authenticity over performance. As Keanu had said that night, in a quote that would be repeated across countless platforms, there's a choice in how we respond to the hardest parts of life. In choosing compassion over bitterness, in using their platform to elevate rather than denigrate, Keanu and Sandra had demonstrated a different kind of strength, one that had not only silenced a notoriously harsh critic, but transformed him in the process. And perhaps most remarkably, They had done it not by matching his initial hostility, not by walking off the set in justified offense, but simply by remaining steadfastly themselves, reminding everyone watching that genuine humanity, expressed without performative anger or bitterness, can be the most disarming force of all. In an industry often criticized for its superficiality, they had shown the profound impact of depth, of lived experience, of wisdom earned through both triumph and tragedy. What began as an attempt to provoke controversy for ratings had instead revealed a hunger for something more meaningful, a conversation about purpose, resilience, and the choices that define not just a career, but a life. The story of that night spread far beyond the entertainment news cycle, touching people who had never even watched the show, resonating with anyone who had ever faced the choice between bitterness and grace in their own lives. It became a case study in crisis communications classes, a viral moment analyzed by cultural critics, and most importantly, a catalyst for the charity it was meant to promote, which saw donations increase tenfold in the weeks following the broadcast. For Marcus Reed, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, both professionally and personally. The man who had built his brand on caustic humor found himself exploring the more challenging territory of vulnerability, discovering that authentic connection could be more compelling than manufactured conflict. For viewers who had tuned in expecting the usual spectacle of celebrity discomfort, it offered something far more valuable, a masterclass in responding to provocation with dignity, in remaining true to one's values even under pressure, in the revolutionary power of simple kindness. And for Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, it was just another day of being exactly who they had always been. Two people who had weathered the extremes of fame and loss and emerged not hardened or cynical, but more deeply committed to using their influence for good. In a media landscape often dominated by sensationalism, their quiet integrity had proven more sensational than any manufactured controversy could ever be, leaving an audience, a host, and eventually millions of viewers absolutely speechless.